In this lecture, what we're going to look at is ways of controlling human population growth. So we've already said that we don't know what type of growth curve the human population is showing. It's got a long lag period, it's got an exponential period, but we don't know if it's going into dieback or whether it's going into stable equilibrium. Now we want it to go into stable equilibrium. We want to force it to show an S-shaped growth curve. So we need to look at ways of making sure that the population growth curve goes into that stable equilibrium, becomes an S-shaped curve. One problem of a continuously growing population is, where do all the new people live? All these new additions to the population want to build a house and raise their own family, and when they build those houses, they often build them on cropland. Croplands are generally nice and flat, nice looking rural areas. So one thing that we'll see as we look around the world is a decrease in the number of cropland from year to year. Now, as we've already talked about, we know that some areas are cutting down tropical rainforest to produce new farmland, but tropical rainforest is not the best quality farmland to be found. So when we have farmland taking up marginal lands like tropical rainforest, and people living on high quality traditional farmlands, that decreases the availability for food production in that area. So we definitely want to control the size of the population so that we don't use up cropland and decrease the amount of food that we can produce. Remember that food is part of the carrying capacity for that area. So what we don't want to do is lower carrying capacity because our population is increased. What we're trying to do is maintain a high or improve the carrying capacity of the area while controlling population size. So what we're trying to do is guarantee we go into that stable equilibrium phase, guarantee we don't run out of cropland, that we can provide enough food for every man, woman and child on the planet. We're trying to produce that sustainable society. So let's have a quick look at some areas that are over carrying capacity. And again, remember that carrying capacity is not a fixed number. It does vary. So we have good years and we have bad years. We have large amounts of water availability some years, better food crops provided some years, and worse food crops. This year tends to be a fairly poor food crop in some areas. There's large numbers of droughts. So we've got areas that are definitely over carrying capacity. And the place we're going to talk about is Ethiopia. So Ethiopia, over near the Horn of Africa, over near Djibouti and Somalia, is an area that you could say is definitely over carrying capacity. Their population is larger than the amount of food that they can produce. Definitely outstrips their food supply very, very often. The capital city of Ethiopia is Addis Ababa, and where we're going to look is just to the southwest of Addis Ababa, and we're going to go down and have a look at a town. The town's approximately 10 miles outside the city, and we'll have some photos from the little village there, and we'll talk about what's going on. So photos are from a refugee camp, and it's during a drought year. And because of the drought year, they've had crop failure, and with crop failure, they're not producing enough food. There's the limiting factor. Not enough food to support the population, so the population is over carrying capacity. And CNN and Fox News and all the other news outlets carry photos of the starving children, and we get this visceral reaction where we want to really go and help these people. So this is a sign that we do have some areas of the world that are over carrying capacity. They're not able to produce enough food to support their own population. This photo is from a farm just outside Addis Ababa, and I said it's about 10 miles outside. And you can see that the drought has killed off all of the ground cover. All of the plant ground cover is gone. All of the large trees are also gone. There's these small bushes just in the background. But all the large trees have gone. The population have cut those down because their main fuel source is wood. So they're cutting down the wood to use for fuel, for use for building materials. And we have now a very dry climate, and all of the grass, all of the clover has all died, and these brown blobs you can see in the field, they would be the cattle, because this was a cattle farm. So with the lack of water, the cattle literally just ran out of water and died where they stood. So here we have a cow who has died from lack of water, and her calf has died trying to suckle right up to the end there, and they've literally just dried up and died. So we've got intrinsic and extrinsic factors going on here. Extrinsic factors, there's just not enough water. There just physically wasn't enough water to support the crops. Intrinsic factors, when you get low crops, they had competition for the last remaining food, competition for the last remaining water. We would have had some cows die early on, some cows would have survived later, but ultimately the farm has completely failed. So these people now have no food supply. So the people that run this farm live together. This is the youngest son in the family, and the meal down at the bottom there is their family's main meal of the day. They have one meal every day. So that meal at the bottom is going to feed that little boy, and here's the dad that's got to eat that same meal, and here's grandpa that's got to share that meal, and here's the older brother that also has to share the meal. Now, we don't have photos of any of the women, but the women would also be sharing that same meal. We've got grandma, the mother, and the three daughters that have to share that same food. So that family's eating a very, very small single meal during the day, and if you just look at this young man, you can definitely tell that they're over carrying capacity. They don't have enough food, they don't have enough water, malnutrition has set in, and they're obviously in dire need of more nutrients per day. So we can definitely say, hey, this group, they're above carrying capacity. Their environment will not support this particular population size. Now, the hard question is, how do you fix that? And one thing we could do is we could just import food. In fact, these photos were taken during an Oxfam relief drive, where Oxfam, which is one of the largest charities in the world, was taking food to the village to feed these people. So we could just deliver food to these people to keep them healthy. So let's just zip to the next slide. So here we have the Oxfam food drive. They're unloading their planes, the supplies they brought in by a large plane at the airport. They're just unloading it. Addis Abeba's got a very large international airport. And here's a boy. I tried to get a photo of a boy about the same age as the one that was in the village. He's a little bit younger, but it's very similar. And you can see that he's much healthier. He's got much more nutrition per day. He can eat a bunch of the rice that's being delivered. So we need to talk about food aid and whether that's good for long-term stability or bad for long-term stability. So here's the problem. Obviously, this young man has received aid and is much healthier. The question is, we're trying to produce a sustainable society. Do you get sustainability by providing food aid? Does providing food aid make this population now below carrying capacity? Or does it mean that the population is still above carrying capacity? Now remember that carrying capacity is that the environment can support the population. And clearly the environment here is not supporting this population without our food aid. So the world environment, the environment of the world, can support all that people. Yes, it can. We can make plenty of food for every man, woman, child on the planet. Oh, this food aid happens to be coming from Europe, but so Europe was making enough food to ship over to these people in Africa and keep them alive. The question is, can that area of the world where they're living, can Ethiopia support their population? And if all you're doing is giving them food aid, then clearly that's not improving the amount of food that Ethiopia is producing. Ethiopia is still above carrying capacity. The world may not be, but Ethiopia is. So is there a better way to get this population below carrying capacity? Now in the previous lecture we said, hey, there's only two ways to deal with it. You can deal with births or you can deal with deaths. So you could just let all these people die, get their population below carrying capacity, and then have no issues. Morally, that's got some big objections to, so we're going to try and steer away from, hey, let's just let everybody die. Second one that we can deal with is births. How can we decrease the number of births so the population doesn't keep on growing and getting larger and larger, even though there's not enough food supply? And then the third one we can deal with is, well, let's just change the carrying capacity. Let's switch carrying capacity, make their carrying capacity larger. And that's the one where we can talk about here. By giving them food, we don't change the carrying capacity of that area. If we could change the carrying capacity by changing their farming techniques, by improving their soil management, by improving their water collection and water dispersal facilities, then if they can irrigate crops and grow more crops, that would change carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is not a fixed number. Right? We produce way more food now per acre of land than we did 200 years ago, than we did 400 years ago, because we have more modern farming techniques, we have more modern planting, more modern harvesting, more modern watering technologies. So if we can export those technologies to other nations, we can change their carrying capacity and push them up so that they can support their population. What we can't do is just give them food aid and think that will change carrying capacity. Giving them food aid doesn't change the carrying capacity of the area. Only by changing the knowledge and the technology of the area can we actually attack carrying capacity. So if we can change carrying capacity by dealing with exporting knowledge, the other way of doing things is to try and push down the birth rate, to control the growth of the population so they have time to improve their agriculture before destroying the land. I like this cartoon because it shows how in the United States we monitor our deer populations and we guarantee that our deer populations stay below carrying capacity. Every year the Department of Natural Resources here in Georgia measure the fat content of deer, measure the health of the deer to make sure the population has enough food to eat and that it's not starving or facing other above carrying capacity problems. And if we find the population's too large, then we take steps to decrease the population. We increase the bag limit on hunters. We change the season so that we can actually harvest more deer and control their population size. So we do that for deer in all of the states in the United States of America. But we don't have a plan to control the human population. Even though in places like Africa there are areas that are over carrying capacity, where people are not provided enough food, not getting enough water to stay healthy, we don't have a global push to control the population to keep everybody healthy. Now, one thing that's definitely true is we can't go into a nation and say you can't have any more children. You're not allowed to breed. Morally, that's also unacceptable. So we have to look at factors that influence the number of children that a family has, and then deal with those factors to try and cause family planning to occur without being completely Nazi-ish in our viewpoint by just saying, no, you may not have children. Now, some populations have done that. You'll be able to read in your book about China where they just say, no, you can have one kid and that's it. But again, environmental science is trying to produce a sustainable society. We're not trying to make a police state or a state where nobody has individual rights. We're trying to tweak what people want. And as we go through this list, we'll see that this has already occurred in many, many countries of the world. Replacement level fertility is the number of offspring a woman has to have in her lifetime to produce no population growth. So it's called ZPG, zero population growth. And replacement fertility rate turns out to be about 2.16. So replacement fertility is about 2.16. The 2, that comes from a child to replace the mother, a child to replace the father. The 0.16 comes about because you have to replace all those children who die before having kids. You have to replace individuals who decide not to have children. And you have to replace individuals that are born infertile and so can't have children. So replacement level fertility ends up being about 2.16 as our average around the planet. Total fertility is the number of kids that the average woman is actually having during her lifetime. So if the total fertility rate was 5, that would be that the average woman would have 5 children during her lifetime. So obviously we want the total fertility to equal the replacement level fertility to get 0 population growth. If we have a total fertility rate of 2.16, our population is at stable equilibrium. It's not growing anymore, it's not shrinking anymore. There's our stable equilibrium S-shaped curve population, as long as there's no immigration. If we could get that on the planet, if we could get a planetary total fertility rate of 2.16, our population would be stable. Now, as we've already said, we don't know what type of growth curve the human population is showing. We don't know whether it's showing an S-shaped or a J-shaped curve, so we can't actually know how big the population will get. You can see that there are different viewpoints on how large our population will be. Some people, hoping that we go into a S-shaped curve, think our population will stabilize out at about 7.8 billion people. So that's about 0.8 billion people more than we have on the planet today. And that goes up to as high as 10.8 billion people by the year 2050 in some of the faster growing models. Notice that's almost 4 billion people more than we have today. So we're not sure where it's going to be. So what we have to do is, what can we do to decrease the number of births, to change people's perceptions of what families should be like, to guarantee that they decrease the number of kids they have to be around the 2.16 mark, to level out our world population. Now we can look up how we do this by simply looking at countries that have already done it. If we look at where the world population growth is occurring, world population growth occurs in less developed countries. Less developed countries are showing very fast population growth. More developed countries, most of them have a total fertility rate of round about the 2 number that we're looking for. So if we went to England, we'd find that total fertility is about where we want it. If we go to France, it's about where we want it. If we go to Australia or Canada or New Zealand or the United States, total fertility rates are very low compared to total fertility rates in less developed nations. So we don't have to guess of the factors that would push down and change the number of births that people want to have during their lives. All we have to do is look and see, well, what happened in our more developed nations to slow down their population growth, and then cause those same things to happen in our less developed nations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a list of the most important things that influence how many offspring individuals have on the planet. So here we have a picture of one family, less developed nations, extremely large family, way above average for even less developed nations. Right? So if you think about more developed nations, think about most people in your community, most people have 2-3 kids. In less developed countries, that's much larger. So what is it that has caused us to change the size of our family? And we can look back in time. If we went back to the 1930s, the 1920s, the 1910s, 1900s in the United States or in England or France and asked females, how many kids do you want? Their average number would have been around about 5. They'd have said, hey, I'd like 5 kids. And if you'd have asked the females, okay, what do you want to do when you grow up? They'd have looked at you like you were crazy, because what they were going to do is they were going to be housewives, staying home to look after their kids. And if we go now and we take a normal classroom of college students and we ask the kids, we ask the students how many children do they want. I do this in my face-to-face class every quarter, and the average number is always 2. The average number always works out to 2 in every class I do this in. So, 100 years ago, they'd have been saying, hey, we want 5 kids. Now they're saying, hey, we only want 2 kids. So what is the difference? What has caused us to change so that we just want smaller families? The number one most important thing when dealing with human population size is education and importance of women. The more educated and the more important women are in society, the fewer children that society has. When you start making women go to school, when you start making women become educated, that's when population changes. That's when the total fertility rate starts going down. In countries where there are no rights of women, they have very high total fertility rates. In countries where women are allowed to have political office, are allowed to have their own job, are allowed to drive, are allowed to go to college and get degrees, are allowed to have careers, are allowed to make their own personal choices, women decide to have less children. And you will hear that right here. If you listen to people around you in the United States, you will hear them do the, yeah, I'm not having children yet, I want to finish my degree, or I want to go to college first. Or they'll say things like, yeah, well, we just want to get this to this point in my career before I stop and have children. So they're deliberately delaying how many children they're having because they're putting their education and their work in front of family. We're used to hearing that in the United States. We're used to hearing it in the United Kingdom, and in more developed countries, that's just the normal standard of thing. In a lot of less developed countries, women do not have rights. They're not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to have a job. They're not allowed to make their own personal decisions. They should be at home looking after the children. So if you're going to fix human population growth, the number one thing you have to do is you have to get education and importance of women. Allow women to make their own decisions. Second thing that's important for population size is affluence. Affluence is a measure of disposable income. How rich are the people? So here we have a local shop in Africa, and for sale you can see there's one pair of used white shoes, there's a pile of beans, and there's a bag of vegetables. So obviously, even if these people had affluence, they had disposable income, money to buy, there's nothing here to buy. You buy the pair of shoes and everything else is just food supply. Now this is number two, so you have to have number one first. You've got to have education and importance. Once people become educated, they earn more money, and then they earn money, they have affluence, and when you have affluence, you buy things with it. You buy stuff that you may not necessarily need to survive. And it's that buying power that changes the birth rate. Because when people can buy things, when they have affluence, they make decisions based on what they want to buy with their money. Again, this is something you've probably heard around friends and family if you live in a more developed country. Yeah, we don't want to have kids yet, we're going to wait until we've bought our house. Yeah, we don't want to have kids yet because we want to save up and pay off the car. We want to go on a cruise. We want to do this or that. So they're using their money for other things rather than having children. So people, they have their career, they're earning money, and again, they're putting aside children and replacing that with things that they spend with their disposable income, things that they can buy. Now obviously if you don't have any income, you're a woman with no importance and no education, you don't have any affluence, then how much does a child cost you? And if you've got no money, the child can't cost you anything because you've got, all it's going to cost you is some food. And as we'll see later, it may even be a benefit. So when people have affluence, when they get that job, when they have education, they start making decisions. And those decisions often lead to, I want this, I'm going to wait and have children until I'm a little bit older. We'll wait until my career's on track before we have the children. So that's education and importance of women. And then number two, affluence. Third thing, child labour. You have to make child labour illegal. Obviously the number one is education. So these children should not be working, they should be in school getting educated. And this is a double-edged sword here. If the children are not working, they're being educated, then education and importance of women is being fostered straight away, early on. Women and all children should be educated. They should be in school, they should go to grade school, they should go to high school, we should be trying to get them into college. Not only that, because they're better educated, they get better jobs, so they have more affluence. And this third reason is, if children can't work, then they no longer become a resource for the family. In very, very poor countries, children are often seen as a resource. They can go out and earn more food, earn more money for that family. So having a large family becomes a benefit. Fourth reason, age of marriage. The average age of marriage on the planet is incredibly young. It's somewhere between 12 and 14 years old. Obviously, if you don't get married until you're 24, then the chance of you having children very early on is reduced. And as you reduce the chance of early children, that decreases the total number of children you can have during your lifetime. So by pushing marriage age older and older, you actually see this pushing back of the number of children that each family has. Again, this is something that's happened in the US. It used to be that people would get married much younger, and again you've heard people say this, oh yeah, we're going to wait until we get out of college, we're going to wait till we graduate before we get married, before we get engaged. So in the US and more developed countries, this one's automatically filtering in because of the education importance of women, because of this idea of working and having affluence, because we expect our children to go to college, they get to get educated. Marriage age has automatically been pushed up. And that's what we need to do in our less developed countries. We need to get the children educated, we need to get them working, we need to get them getting married later, so that the women aren't doing the role of mother at a young age, they're doing the role of student at a young age. Next one. So, what are you going to do when you get old? Where are you going to go when you get old? With my face-to-face class, at this point I always ask the students, okay, when you are 85, 90, you have to walk with a frame. You need help with the bathroom. You need help getting into and out of bed. Where are you going to live? And I go around and I ask them. So think about that. When you're 90, where are you hoping to live? Do you want to live in your own home and have a nurse come in and help take care of you? Do you want to live in a nursing home so you can have support when you need it? Or do you want to live with your family and have your family take care of you? And we total up what people answer. And then I switch the question around and I say, okay, think about this. Think about whether you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend or you're married, whoever your spouse is, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, think about their mother and father. Think about their parents. And think of the one that you dislike the most. So think of the in-law that you dislike the most. They're 90. They need help walking. They need help wiping when they've been to the bathroom. They drool when they eat and need help eating. Where are they going to live? Are they living at home with nursing help provided, because you're going to pay for that? Are they living in a nursing home? Or are they living with you and you're looking after them? And often the two answers are very different. Often people say, hey, I'm going to live with my family, until we turn around and say, okay, well, the in-law that you like the least, are they coming to live with you? And they go, no way, we're going to keep them at home, or we're going to put them in a nursing home. And it's interesting that we get that choice. we do get the choice, and you'll have the choice, and your kids will get the choice of where you're going to go. The guy on the screen from a less developed country, so where's he getting the money from to pay for a nursing home? He doesn't have the social security payment, and you may or may not when you get older. He doesn't have a pension, so his only choice is to live with his children. So in less developed nations, children become the safety net of old age. This is a big one that's seen in countries like Nepal, where the standard is have lots of kids, because when I'm old, I'm going to spend time with one of my children and then move and spend a couple of months with the next child, then move and spend a couple of months with the next child. So the old age security net is a large family. In the US, the security net is you get a pension, you get an IRA, you start planning for your old age while you're working, and you put money away. Now, if you're going to decrease the size of the family, then obviously you have to get more educated, you have to have affluence, and some of that affluence has to go into financial planning that is a social security net, that is a retirement planning net, so that when people get old, they don't have to rely on their offspring to look after them. They have that planned out. Now, this is way down on our list, because obviously you have to do the education, the importance of women, they're getting a job, they're having money before you can even work on this one. But if you're going to stabilize the population, you have to have retirement planning. You have to have, how is the population going to support itself when it's old? Now, if you've been listening to all the issues about Social Security here in the United States, you got to know that, even we here in a more developed country haven't got this one completely fixed. But it is something that you have to do to stabilize your population. And the next factor, infant mortality rate. Yeah, I didn't have a good picture for this one. So you've got the coffin on the left-hand side and the little boy looking out there. So it's infant mortality rate. One of the odd things about populations is that the higher the infant mortality rate, the higher the number of children that die, the more births there are. So families that have children die have more children. Families that watch their children die have large numbers of children. Families that don't see their children die don't have as many. So here in the US, if I was to ask you how many children do you want, most people, the average is going to be, I want 2 kids. And if we then say, okay, well, how many kids are you going to have? The students look at me like I'm crazy, and they go, well, I'm going to have 2 kids. If we go to a less developed nation with a high infant mortality rate, and we say, how many children do you want? And they say, we want to have 4 children. And then we say, well, how many are you going to have? They're not going to say 4. They're going to say 6, because they're expecting 2 of them to die. 2 of them won't make it to adulthood. So they're going to have 6, expecting to maintain 4 of them. So obviously, if we can control the infant mortality rate, if we can get the number of child deaths down, then they don't have to have as many children. That pressure, that social understanding that you will lose children disappears. It's already happened in the United States. It's way down the list, because if you're becoming educated and you have a workforce that's educated, and you have affluence, so you can improve the amount and quality of the running water, the drinking water that comes to your house, that you can improve the sewage treatment that's in your community, all of those things. You have educated people, you have medical care. That leads to a decrease in the infant mortality rate. You don't actually have to have a plan to do this. This one is almost self-fixing. If you do the previous things we've talked about, then people become educated. They clean up their environment, and infant mortality rate goes down. But if we can push the infant mortality rate down, then the actual birth rate drops as well. Right, here we've got a picture of the White House. Because our next thing that influences population size is government policy. You gotta have government policy to make all these things happen. If the government is not willing to support the importance and education of women, then you won't control the population. If the government is not trying to prevent children from working, if the government allows children to work, then you won't decrease the growth rate in the population. So government policy has a very large impact. If we actually pass laws that say children have to be in school, you don't have a choice. By the age of 5, you will be enrolled in school. Whether that's homeschooled or in a state school or private school, in the US you don't get a choice. Your child is going to be educated. When we have rules that give rights to women, that will influence the population size. But the government has to be behind these. And it has to be their government. The United States cannot go into a country, what country it is, and say, hey, this is how you need to be, because they won't listen to you. If Venezuela, if the Venezuelan ambassador suddenly stood up in Washington, D.C. today and said, the United States has it all wrong, they need to start driving on the other side of the street, 99% of Americans would go, we're not doing that. You can't tell us what to do. And that's how every nation is. They won't listen to outsiders. They've got to do it themselves. Their own government has to have a plan to control their population growth through making their women have an active role in their economy, by educating them, by giving them work, by having them earn affluence so that they can spend money and buy better things for their homes, so that they get clean water, so they get treated sewage, so that their improved food supply occurs, their marriage age will go down, well, they're going to get older when they get married, the number of children will therefore go down that are born, and their population will be stabilized. It's got to come from the government of that country. And this last one is availability of family planning, birth control. So if the government is actually behind it, they then have to allow the nation to control the number of births they have. Obviously, people continue to have sex. You only have to listen to college students to find out that they continue to have sex. So what we have to do is make it so that we don't have kids every single time we have sex. We've got to do some family planning. Family planning is provided so that families that want to have children can work out how to have children, and families that don't want to have children can work out how to not have children. So our picture here is a little bit odd. This is from a town in India. Cows are sacred in India, and what is surprising is the two cows that are here, because they are sacred and therefore not killed, their population was getting out of control. Their population was just booming and had become a health hazard. And the cows just wander around the city, wander out into the streets. So for drivers, it was a huge, big health hazard to have cows in the road. So one of these cows is on Depo-Provera, the other one is on Norplant, so they're getting birth control. Two types of birth control methods for the cows. So it was just one of those ironies that the cows in the picture were getting government-supported birth control, and the people in the picture were not getting government-supported birth control. India has the fastest-growing population on the planet. At the moment, it's the second most populous nation, and very quickly it will become the most populous nation on the planet. So if we have affluence, we have education and importance of women and all the other things, we have to have some government backing to allow birth control methods to be legal. So that was our list of things we have to change the population size, the population growth rate of a country. Understanding that they're the things to change, that's pretty easy. Hopefully you went through the list and were just like, oh yeah, I can see how that would work. Yeah, if the women are educated, if they're actually out at work, then they're not at home, and they're not going to want as many children. And that one is not intellectually difficult to understand. The hard part is, how do you get a nation to go through this process? And one way to look at it is to think about how a country changes as it becomes industrialized. So one way to think about it is to think about it with this idea of the demographic transition. Right? So the demographic transition is a model that basically shows how countries progress as they become industrialized. Right? So Europe went through the demographic transition. North America went through the demographic transition. And they started out as less developed nations. They became industrialized, and then they became more developed nations. So we can look at how this happens, and then we can talk about what's happening to less developed countries and whether they can go through the demographic transition. So this is our demographic transition. We start out on the left-hand side. You can see there's 4 phases, 4 columns. When we start out on the left-hand side, population is very small, but there's a very high birth rate. The population's not growing though, because the death rate is huge as well. And this is where we were, at the dawn of civilization, into the lag phase in our growth curve of the human population. So if we're dealing with Europe, population size is very small. They're still hunter-gatherers. They're doing just a little bit of farming. Birth rate's very high. Most of those children die through diseases, lack of food during the winter. Population doesn't grow. Let's move into column 2, and you can see that the death rate has decreased. So then, as we start farming, we are producing much more food. And as we produce more food, we start to store it for the winter. And we start actually understanding our environment. We're building better homes, we're building better clothes. Death rate is going down. We still have a very high birth rate. Right? Birth rate is still humongous. At that point, the population is starting to grow. We've developed the ability to harvest large amounts of food, to plant large amounts of food, to collect more food than the population actually needs, so we can sell it at market for other goods. People are specializing in growing wheat and then swapping that wheat for currency so they can buy fish, so they can buy eggs. So food supply is excellent. Birth rate's very high, death rate is dropping, population's growing like crazy. Move into step 3. Technological development. We start getting sewage treatment plants, we start getting medicine, we start getting refrigeration. As we get those, death rate goes down even more. People are not starving anymore during the winter. Hygiene is improving. Population is getting more educated. Factories need educated workers. Educated workers get an education, get a job. They get a large amount of money, therefore they get affluence. Affluence leads to changes in what they want to do with their life. Do they want to get more educated? Do they want to get a better job instead of having children? So we see that the birth rate starts to fall as well. So as the population becomes educated, the birth rate drops. The death rate drops. Population is still growing fast because the birth rate is still higher than the death rate. Right? So the population is still growing quickly, but we've seen a change. And this is where a lot of the population of the planet is today. And then step 4, you can see that women become educated. As soon as women become educated and they get the right to vote and they get the right to have a job, we get very high quality technology, excellent medical care, excellent sewage treatment, excellent water treatment, excellent food cleanliness, huge amounts of refrigeration, massive amounts of freezers. Food's no longer a problem, clean water's not a problem, so our death rate sort of levels out. We get a very low death rate. You're dying mostly because of old age diseases. And at this point, birth rate levels out as well. Because we have educated women, because we have affluence, because of all those things we've talked about, this technology allows us to have a low birth rate, and our population becomes stable. That's where we are. That's where we are right now. So that's a more developed country going through the demographic transition. The problem is, when we look at step 3, what were we doing when we were passing through step 3? Our technology is starting to grow like crazy, and our industry is using up large amounts of natural resources. So if we just think about the United Kingdom, England has this fast growing economy. Where are they getting the resources to run that? England's a small place. So they have ships going around the world and taking natural resources and feeding them back into the English economy. They're in America feeding cotton back into the English economy. They're out in India feeding goods back into the British economy. And those goods, those environmental inputs, are driving us through the demographic transition. Today, where would Ethiopia do that same thing? If Ethiopia has a population that's growing really fast and its population hits carrying capacity point, where do they go to get the extra resources to allow them to push through the demographic transition? They could go next door to Eritrea. The problem there, though, is Eritrea also has a population above carrying capacity, so they don't have the resources necessary to drive through the demographic transition. So our problem becomes, how do you allow less developed countries to pass through the demographic transition? How can we prevent them from damaging their environment so they run out of resources before they get into stage 4, where we are now? I don't have an answer for you. I'm not going to be able to tell you, hey, this is how you do it, because if we had that nice answer, we wouldn't be teaching this part of the course. We'd have fixed the world population, and environmental science wouldn't be a problem anymore. We really don't have that answer. How you get less developed countries the resources they need to drive them so they have a real economy, so that they can get that high-tech development needed to get into the stage 4 without getting stuck in what we call the demographic trap. The demographic trap is that your economy is growing, your population is growing, and all of a sudden you saw those pictures from Ethiopia. They're trying to have a cow farm, and yet they just don't have the ecological resources to support that number of cows. They've used up all the trees, rain's no longer coming, the cow farm collapses, boom, and you get in this demographic trap. You're above carrying capacity and the population just nosedives. That's a problem. I don't have an answer for you. Hopefully you'll look in the book, and when we talk to one another during the face-to-face discussion in the discussion room, you'll be able to come up with some answers. So what does the future hold? Well, there's really a number of things that we need to look at for how our less developed countries can progress through and stabilize their population. The first one is availability of raw materials. How can we get raw materials to a population so that it can build an economy? Now, in the United States, our lifestyle is definitely tied to us using resources. We use large amounts of water. I know we have problems here in Georgia that our population is outstripping the availability of water. We're in a period of considerable drought. We do have a lot of water stress in our area. So we've got to actually make sure that it's not just less developed countries, but also in more developed countries, we do have adequate supply of raw materials. Now, how we do that is going to be very difficult, because supplying raw materials is very, very expensive. Building brand new reservoirs to store water is definitely expensive in Georgia and hard to do. Providing enough materials for an economy is not something that the US can do for every other country that's out there. We have enough problems supplying our own economy with resources. Number 2, availability of energy. We do energy as our next series of lectures. But if you're going to have an economy, then you have to have energy. And right now that's based on fossil fuels, oil and coal, and they all produce pollution problems. So if you want to do availability of energy for every country on the planet, we've got to really look at renewable fuels. How can we do that in a renewable way? Making sure that every country's got enough energy to have an industry so its population can be educated and have affluence, and therefore maintain its population size, rather than just go through exponential growth until they're above carrying capacity. And then we've got waste disposal. As the population is large, you've got to actually make sure we get rid of the waste disposal. And we're not just talking about sewage treatment here, we're also talking about all the industrial wastes. With the population being extremely large, we would need to get rid of all of those industrial wastes. And how do we do that safely? And where do we do that? Would it be acceptable to have some of the less developed countries develop a economy on waste disposal? If we just think about all of the batteries used in the United States at the moment, cell phone batteries, car batteries, just batteries in all of the remote controls, would it be acceptable to have a less developed nation be a recycling nation who bases their economy on recycling of materials, often called e-waste or computer waste, and just recycle that through? And the last one is interaction with other organisms. Remember that biodiversity is incredibly important for the stability of the planet. If we want to maintain a society for the long term, then we have to have a lot of genes that we can use. We have to have other organisms that we can tap in for their ability to provide us with materials, with nutrition, with medicines, and that's just the anthropocentric view. If you take a more biocentric view, we have to think about how we can support those animals just because they have an innate right to live. So how can we have a population grow without taking up all of the land for humans and not leaving land for other wildlife? So I understand that I have not given you any nice, simple, do this and you'll fix the human population issues. What I've given you is, these are ways that you can influence the population size, and now it's up to you to think about what you're going to do to change the education importance of women, to prevent children from working. That's stuff that you have to do. And really, I'm giving you this quest for the rest of your life. So what are you going to do? How are you going to spend your money at the shops to make sure that children aren't working to produce your sneakers or your jeans? What are you going to do when you're in the supermarket to make sure that you're supporting the education importance of women? What are you going to do through governmental issues to try and actually put pressure on governments around the world to change the way that they treat their children or treat their women, or provide aid to their people, so that rather than just giving food aid, they're actually given the ability to farm their land with better technology, rather than just a horse and cart and hope it rains, to actually till their field in a way that will trap more water so that they can produce larger amounts of crops and change their carrying capacity. So think about those things. This is the end of the population section, and our next piece that we get to talk about, that will be energy. See you next week.